Next session is about to begin. Thank you for your patience. I just want to walk you through if anyone needs translation. The kits are on your chairs or flag an organizer if you didn't get one. English will be on channel 2, French on channel 3, and Slovak on channel 4. So just take your seats, get your Slido ready, and we'll begin in a few minutes. Cheers. And I'm with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and the President of GLOBSEC, Róbert Vass.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome the President of the French Republic, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, to Bratislava and to the GLOBSEC Forum. Welcome. Actually, this is the second time that President Macron visited GLOBSEC. We had the privilege to host Mr. President in 2018 for the Citizens Dialogue, for a discussion on the future of Europe. But on this forum, you're for the first time, so very welcome. But since 2018, a lot has changed. And the brutal war of Russia on our borders have made this region a geopolitical hotspot, and this forum a gathering on the front lines of democracy. And Europe has realized that it is not anymore a continent of peace, and that the trade with Russia brings no peace, just vulnerability. And Europe has woken up that for defense of peace, we have to pay a price. I have very quick 3 points to make and to highlight about French leadership. First of all, I would like to recognize the fact that France is increasingly interested and present politically, economically, and diplomatically in Central Europe. And your presence here today demonstrates the importance you place in re-engaging with Central Europe, addressing the critical issues facing our world here in the region, but also to discuss, listen, and engage with Central Europeans. We appreciate that. Thank you. Number two, I would like to recognize the indispensable role of the French EU presidency in keeping Europe together in the most difficult and crucial time when Russian aggression to Ukraine happened. It was the French leadership, together with Central European countries, that has made it possible to grant the candidacy status of EU membership to Ukraine. Also, France helped the EU to respond with speed and efficiency, and notable on the sanctions to Russia and Belarus. And also, Mr. Macron, you introduced the European political community to where you are flying from here tomorrow. The war, as tragic as it is, provides for all of us an opportunity to reinvent the European project, and your personal leadership is essential in this task. So Mr. President Macron will deliver a speech in French, so prepare your headsets, and after that we will have a session with questions in English, so prepare your questions, because we will have around 20 minutes, and we will have an open conversation. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to President Emmanuel Macron. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Président. Je suis très heureux de retrouver beaucoup de visages amis dans cette salle. Mesdames et Messieurs les Présidentes et Présidents, Premiers ministres, ministres, ambassadrices, ambassadeurs, cher Robert. Alors, en effet, depuis que GLOBSEC a ouvert ses portes en 2008, de nombreux dirigeants et responsables politiques sont venus au Bratislava Forum, mais sauf erreur de ma part, pas encore de président français, ce qui était sans doute une incongruité. Et ce serait plus encore aujourd'hui, alors que se joue justement, avec la guerre lancée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine voisine, tout simplement l'avenir de notre continent, qui se joue aussi pour beaucoup dans cette région. Et d'autant que nous sommes aussi à l'orée d'un mois qui résume l'ampleur de nos enjeux stratégiques, le sommet de la communauté politique européenne, puis un Conseil européen
tomorrow in Chisinau, the summit of the European Political Community starts. Then we'll have an important European Council, and finally the NATO summit in Vilnius. And that's why I would like to present how I see these opinions, and I will do it quite typically. I will speak freely. 20 years ago, the European Union opened its doors to Slovakia and to other countries which were freed from the Soviet dominance. This was not only the enlargement of our union, but this was the return of members to the family from which you were separated for too long. I'm not talking about the divisions of Western and Eastern Europe, and Old Europe and a New Europe. This would perpetuate the artificial border imposed for decades by the Soviet Union. There is only one Europe, a single framework which connects all the threads of history. It represents geopolitical, historical richness as well. And I think this is something that connects us all. We are connected by a single European project. It's not a national project, but we, each of us, separately, inseparably carry a national project and a European project. Let us remember the last words of the director of the Hungarian press agency a few minutes before being crushed by Russian artillery in November 1956. We will die for Hungary and for Europe. The curtain fell on our continent. That's when the Iron Curtain basically led to an enforced estrangement, as Milan Kundera wrote in his works. But then Slovakia entered the Union, but before that we couldn't listen to you, listen to your tragic stories and destinies. So you might have lost your opportunity to speak or to remain silent. And we also lost opportunities to listen. That time is over. And today, that voice is the voice of all of us. My message today is simple. We will not let Europe be kidnapped a second time. Europe will not be kidnapped a second time, I repeat. The stakes are high because the war is on our borders. Ukraine's aggression, in essence, is the latest manifestation, an extreme manifestation, obviously, of the Russian attempt to shake up the European unity. This was something that Russia attempted for 15 years. They did everything to shake up the whole edifice of European security and to reshape Europe on its own terms. The stages are known. Vladimir Putin's speech in Munich in 2007, aggression against Georgia in 2008, then the events in Ukraine in 2014, but then again in 2022, and the creeping vassalization or subjugation of Belarus. What Russia is asking for on the eve of the war, and which was codified in the draft treaties, it was unacceptable, and these were obligations which couldn't be followed. Basically, we were not able to organize the European architecture within OSCE or other projects, but as for NATO's response, it was too much or too little. NATO offered a prospect to Ukraine and Georgia, which exposed these two countries to Russian vindictiveness without protecting them. We haven't provided sufficient guarantees to certain states, and at the same time, we haven't started discussions with Russia about the security dialogue. This was all delegated, and we shouldn't have done that in this way. And we basically just increased the dependence on Russia in terms of raw materials. We didn't have a coherent approach. I know what you experienced during your times being dominated by the Soviet Union, but each country should have the right to pick its allies. If a country decides for democracy and transparency and freedom, it is never a threat to its neighbors. And as I was able to forcefully verify with the major partners of the G7 in Japan, because it was one of the most consensual points among these leaders, the foundation of the Charter of the United Nations remains sovereign equality. It has never been limited sovereignty. But what the war in Ukraine shows is not only that these claims to put part of Europe under guardianship are illegal and unacceptable, but it is also that seen from the cold reasoning of the balance of power, they are now unrealistic. In Kiev, Kharkiv, and Kherson, vast Russian armies retreated before then being consumed in Bakhmut and elsewhere for negligible gains. The war is far from over, but I believe one thing is clear: Ukraine will not be conquered. What was called a special operation a year ago, it turns out it is a geopolitical failure, which resulted in the accession of Finland and I hope soon of Sweden to NATO, but also in the aggravated mistrust of all the neighbors to Russia. And of course, the UN legitimacy of Russia fell as well because they do not respect the UN Charter. So it's important to understand that future peace arrangements cannot be dictated by Russia. So how we got to this situation? Well, how we got there says several things about us. The first is the strength of our alliance. From the first days of the conflict, NATO ensured the security of its borders. Article 5 has played its full role, and I am convinced that it keeps Russia in check. We should be grateful to our American allies who provided a major part of the equipment and intelligence support to Ukraine. In December 2019, I said an important sentence which was about NATO. Remember what I said? That was that about the division of NATO. I said that's a death of NATO. That would be the death of NATO. Remember Turkey, for instance, but we are all woken up by Putin and his step. But really, the European Union was active in an exemplary way. We got unified quite fast. I don't think Russia expected the European Union to react in such a way. 67 billion in aid in total, including 14 billion in military aid. It was extremely fast and comprehensive, delivering weapons, sanctions, emergency aid, welcoming millions of refugees, especially in this part of Europe. In a few months, we completely changed our energy systems because they were dependent on Russia. And we adopted a clear doctrine. Europe got on the way of European sovereignty. And what was agreed in Versailles in March 2022 was extended. That's when I was talking about the defense sovereignty. So, of course, we got united. We also reached ideological clarity, and economically, in terms of, we supported Ukraine both in humanitarian ways and military ways. This will definitely continue in the following months and weeks. This everything needs to be something permanent. And I'm now remembering what I said to basically see into the future. I'm sure Moscow hopes that time will help. There will be elections in some countries, that there will be some kind of tiredness in the public opinion. But let's have a look at what we have to do from the medium and short term. Of course, we have to provide effective assistance to Ukraine, an efficient offensive. That's what we are doing. This needs to lead to a permanent peace as well. And another question is, what is peace? Well, peace in Ukraine and Europe that wouldn't be that arms stop, that we will have ceasefire, but we cannot sacrifice any territories against international law, because from the long-term view, this would make us all weaker. There is only one peace, and that's a peace which respects international law, and the conditions of this peace have to be picked by those who were attacked, and that's the Ukrainians. But we will also need to have some guarantees together with the peace that will be attained. We have to think about how to continue. Of course, the conflict will go on. We need to be honest. Of course, I hope that in the next weeks and months there will be an offensive, a counteroffensive, and that this counteroffensive will be successful. But of course, there will be the other years, the recovery of Ukraine, and we will also have to deal with the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. But we have to think about the public opinion in our countries, and we need to show that we will stand by Ukraine's side always. And for that, together with our partners, we need to revise during the summer the character of our assistance, so that we can get to these desired results. First of all, we have to persuade the South, because in the context that I mentioned, we have one fragile part of the world. Without the engagement of Japan and other countries, well, we have to understand one thing. This is not a war of the Western countries. Many developing countries think that this is not their war. Many of them are convinced that this is an aggression, that this is a lack of respect for the UN Charter, but they are just saying this very quietly, because they think the priority should be fight against poverty in their countries. And many of these developing countries think that they are on the weaker side because they don't get our assistance because we are helping Ukraine. So we have this risk. And there is also a risk that these countries will turn to a different power and we will have a new global order. And because of this division, there can be large alliances which will be directed towards Russia. So, of course, on the one hand, we have to support Ukraine and prepare peace, but we shouldn't forget about developing countries and the south part of the world, so they do not change sides. This needs to be part of our agenda. So let's have a look at the future. We ask the following question. What are the possible future scenarios for Europe? How can Europe bring lasting peace and stability? From the short term, we know what to do. The states have shown their engagement. NATO reinforced its eastern wing, the European Union was active, but is this enough? From the long term, well, thankfully, the US administration currently stands by our side. But they also request trustworthiness from our side. So far, we are thankful for what the United States are doing, but we are asking if this administration remains unchanged in the future, well, our stability and security shouldn't be delegated and leave it at the discretion, at the decision of the US voters. Well, the Americans want to share the responsibility in NATO, no matter who is in the government. So that's why I think Europe is an important pillar, and the only way for us to be trustworthy and not be dependent, and to accept the burden that we are supposed to carry, and that's important to follow, because the geography will not change. We will still be living here under Russia, and Russia will still be located where it is. And that's why we need to create space or an environment which will be an environment of lasting peace. If international law is respected in this continent, we still have to live alongside Russia. We shouldn't be naive towards Russia. I never have been naive towards Russia because I know what the geography is. And there will be no ocean between us and Russia. So I definitely don't want to replace NATO with something else. And I would like to dismiss the fantasies of a Franco-German condominium that some here and there have thought they detected. This is not something we want to change NATO into, but of course Poland and some other countries also need to accept their responsibility. But at the same time, they need to be responsible for their own security and the security of their neighboring countries. What we need quite urgently is to speed up strategic decisions and the implementation of what we decided to adopt, and this is what we have to plan. We need the European capacity in terms of energy technologies and the military capabilities. Since March 2023, we have been mentioning this, and now we need to do it in a much faster way, quite specifically, and we need to produce and buy in Europe and engage Europe more and more, of course. The national interest will be part of that. We have seen that in France, we have some military planning for 2024 to 2030, and in the total 413 billion euros. We have the horizon of 2% of GDP. But we see these collective efforts, and this makes it trustworthy. So what is the task of Russia's aggression in Ukraine if we are talking about, for example, Romanian units? This is a European defense decision, and we need to have these capabilities. This is also an industrial effort. When we depleted our arsenal, we have seen that we don't have such a number of arsenal that would be produced. So what we need to do is to buy ammunition in the EU, and we need to get prepared for tomorrow. In Europe, we need to create an advantage. We need to do this together. We need to take the initiative to produce, but we also need to go beyond that. We need to harmonize our standards. Of course, in Europe we have much more standards than in the US, but if we create the technological basis of defense, which will be truly European, for all countries which are interested in that, well, it will provide them with a benefit. This will also decrease our dependence.
Je pense évidemment à l'initiative européenne d'intervention que nous avons lancée il y a 5 ans et qui garde toute sa pertinence aujourd'hui.
Of course, we also need a European intervention initiative. This is a common project and common effort, which is very important. We have seen its importance also in the missions in Africa. It is necessary to be active and to be active together in the missions. We need to cooperate and create interoperability. For that to happen, we need to cooperate in new missions and new tasks in other regions of the world as well. When we talk about the strengthening of our military forces and powers, we should be able to defend ourselves and our neighbors.
pour gérer les guerres d'hier ou d'aujourd'hui, ou pour gérer les conflits qui sont simplement ceux qui
We should not only be able to face wars today or aggressions today, we also need to be prepared for the future. We need to be able to help our neighbors if they need our help.
et le maritime. Et ils sont au moins aussi importants que des guerres continentales terrestres qu'on a vu rester
Naturally, it is equally important
l'agression russe et qu'on pensait voir disparaître, mais qui n'enlève pas les nouvelles formes de conflictualité.
that we
Ayons aussi cette lucidité.
focus on the war aspect as well as the experience with Russia has shown.
Au-delà de
We
cette
need to think clearly, we need to have our minds
le deuxième défi, c'est de
clear
faire que
and
l'Europe
to be ready for the future and potential future conflicts.
en devienne l'actrice de plein droit. J'ai été frappé, moi, ces dernières années.
And the second challenge or the second matter
Nous n'étions
that I
pas
want to talk about is that Europe
nous, Européens.
should not
C'est très dur pour un président
be just
de dire ça,
following some strategic
de la contrariété.
activities of the others. We need to be an active
J'ai
player.
connu cette expérience d'arriver à un sommet de l'OTAN avec une autre administration européenne, une autre administration américaine.
For example, at the NATO summit,
Notifiant à peine et en coordonnant de manière
when we cooperated with a different American administration,
avec le traité FNI, en disant les Russes ne le respectent plus. L'année 2019, nous, Européens, nous avons découvert qu'un traité qui nous couvrait face à des missiles qui touchaient notre sol, le non-respect russe et la décision américaine pouvaient nous
we
laisser.
discussed the INF treaty, which was
De la même manière, lorsque
not discussed sufficiently, and the communication with the then American administration in this regard was more complicated.
etc., etc. Je le dis très
In
clairement,
addition, we know that Russia did not respect NATO treaties, and I want to say very clearly that us Europeans need to be active players, active stakeholders, and protect the treaties which protect our security as well. This is the future.
nous ne serons
We
jamais
can't leave it up to the others,
Et donc, oui, nous devons
be it the US or Russia or anybody else. We need to be credible partners, credible players.
maîtriser pleinement les
That's
armements.
why
Je reviens avec ce que je disais sur notre lucidité
it
industrielle.
is very important
L'Europe a été absente
to
du
be
traité,
able
comme le
to
traité sur les forces nucléaires intermédiaires ou le traité
handle the armament, and here I come back to the industrial sovereignty that I mentioned before.
Elle sera actrice et non spectatrice de ces
We need to be much more
C'est pourquoi j'ai
active.
appelé les Européens à se doter d'une capacité de frappe dans la profondeur qui renforcera notre sécurité.
We need to have a stronger say, for example, in the industrial production in Europe, because this also strengthens our independence.
Pour explorer une coopération dans ce domaine. Le second qui est lié
I would
sur la
like to
défense
discuss this
antiaérienne.
with other European partners who are interested in this topic.
C'est un sujet stratégique avant d'être un sujet de
Furthermore,
capacité industrielle, mais très clairement,
I would like
il
to
doit
talk
reposer
about
sur un équilibre
air defense.
d'action offensive et d'action défensive. Il doit prendre en compte clairement la dissuasion nucléaire.
The war in Ukraine has shown how important this area is.
Sera organisé à
We
partir
need
des
to find a balance of offensive action and defensive action.
Européens ici représentés à s'y rendre, et elle nous permettra de poursuivre ensuite le travail. Et le troisième, c'est plus largement la
We
manière pour
must
l'Europe
clearly
de
focus on
sécuriser
nuclear
son
deterrence as well, and I promised in Munich that a conference will be organized about this subject in Paris.
Et pour cela, soyons très clairs, la question de la
I would like
sécurité
to
du voisinage va se poser.
Warmly
Nous y reviendrons
welcome
sans doute dans
all
les
interested partners
Mais la
to
sécurisation
sit around the round table and discuss this topic with us.
et d'une Europe pleinement actrice. Nous devrons apporter à l'Ukraine des garanties de sécurité solides pour marquer un
We
coup
need
d'arrêt
to
à la déstabilisation.
Make sure that Ukraine
Et si la Russie persiste à vouloir déstabiliser l'Europe, elle doit être prête à en payer le
has
géopolitique.
stable
J'entends tous les débats que nous
security,
avons,
that it is
mais nous
protected.
serions d'étranges acteurs géopolitiques à dire nous armons
I
massivement,
have heard many debates and discussions
mais nous ne voulons l'inclure dans
about
aucun
this,
débat
but we are
stratégique
part
de
of
sécurité.
geopolitics. We help massively to Ukraine, but we don't want to involve Ukraine in strategic
En
discussions.
un an, tous ceux qui, à bon droit, ont aidé l'Ukraine en ont fait un acteur tellement puissant qu'il vaut mieux le réinclure dans ces architectures de sécurité
I
existantes.
know that This has been discussed before, but I think that the best way to go forward is to engage Ukrainian representatives. If we want credible and sustainable peace, if we want to be a credible partner to the Ukrainians, we need to give Ukraine sufficient means to stop further aggression.
C'est pourquoi je suis favorable, et ce sera l'objet des discussions collectives dans les prochaines semaines d'ici au sommet de Vilnius, mais de donner
Of course, this needs to be discussed together with other partners, but
pour deux raisons.
we must be able to guarantee tangible and sustainable protection and defense of Ukraine, because Ukraine is protecting Europe today. That's a fact. That's why Ukraine is supported so much. It's part of a multilateral framework, and it's a result of many discussions that we have led. We need more ambitious strategies and activities than we had before. From the midterm perspective, we need to work on sustainable peace in Ukraine. We need to focus on our relationships with other countries.
D'éviter une escalade des capacités dans l'avenir. Pour un moment sortir de cet état de guerre quand la paix sera négociée.
And we need to prevent escalations in the future. This is how we can achieve stability. We must not find ourselves in a situation that, for example, Russia will be so heavily armed that we will need to change the course or change our plan. We need to be active, we need to sit at the table and be able to discuss. And we need to be able to assess if we are still going in the right direction. I would like to add that 1 year ago in Strasbourg, I talked about the European policies and how to reinvent them, and how to revisit the question of political organization of Europe beyond the European Union. We don't want to be a competitor to NATO, of course, but at the same time we must make sure that NATO does not replace the enlargement of the European Union. In terms of energy, security, political strategies, we need to have a common solution, and enlargement of the EU is one of the ways forward. Tomorrow I will discuss precisely these topics in Chisinau. We will discuss among partners, and we will try to look at the topics in an innovative way. We all need to focus on solidarity to protect ourselves and to maintain security. When it comes to the EPC, it's an important part of our efforts, but again, the EPC does not substitute enlargement. I think that we need to enlarge as quickly as possible. Maybe remember that France in 2018 suggested changes to the accession procedure and the enlargement procedure. However, we see that the current procedures may not work as we have thought. I think we should avoid a few mistakes. The first mistake would be to maintain the status quo, to give hope to the Western Balkans, for example, Moldova and so on, and just to play for time. This would be a tremendous mistake, I believe. I think that this would also give space to those who want to destabilize Europe. And one day, we would wake up in the morning and the situation would suddenly be much more dramatic and negative than it is now. Another mistake that we could make is to invite other countries because we need to integrate Western Balkans and Moldova in the EU and just welcome them in the EU, but do nothing further. And that would also be a mistake, because we would be weakened as Europe. We need to pay attention to the specificities of these countries that would be the new members of the EU. So the Western Balkans can join the EU, Moldova, and they will become our partners in defense, in migration, and in other areas. But then we would impose more and more conditions on them, for example, in terms of the economy and other areas. But let us remember that Europe was not built to be enlarged forever in the geographical terms, of course. Europe was construed to deepen the integration. Such geopolitical clarification needs to take place. Yes, Europe needs to be enlarged, but we also need to innovate its management. We need to have different formats of discussions, and we need to clearly define what the formats are responsible for, which format is responsible for what, and we need to make sure that Western Balkans, Moldova, and other countries which want to be part of the EU understand this. We need to build integration. These countries need to work or rule of law, and they need to adhere to the rules of the European institutions. I know that my speech was rather long, so I will finish very soon. I think that I mentioned the most important aspects. We need to build sustainable long-term peace in Ukraine. This is very important for the future of the entire continent. I'm sure that the upcoming months, or maybe 2-3 years, will be the most crucial. This was the strategic alarm clock. This was the wake-up call for Europe. So we have woken up, and I think that you know why I'm here today. You can count on France. France maybe used to be seen as an arrogant country which doesn't care about this part of Europe at all and its future. But this is not true. For us, each and every member state, each and every country is important for us. The EU, that's not just Brussels, that's all the capitals of the member states of the EU. There's no place for not cooperating together. We need to build together a stronger Europe. And we can't do it alone. We can't do it in trios. We can't do it as 3 countries. We need to really work together, 27 member states of the EU. And for that to happen, we need to have an open, honest, wide dialogue. Of course, respecting the differences among the countries. We need to also respect the national objectives that we have defined for ourselves in our respective member states. Europe is a large democratic power which is united. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You are known as a person one of the few leaders who can think strategically beyond emergencies, and I think you have proved it today, because you have laid out a very important vision in building Europe, enlarging it, and you have mentioned several very important things. First of all, you said that the special military operation, as Russians called it, have become a geopolitical failure. for Russians. You also said how the peace should look like. It should be on Ukrainian terms, and there should be no compromises on the territory, which is very important to see, and also a peace that is just. So I will be opening the conversation now with Mr. President, so if I will see the hands here, please raise them up, and I will take question in 3. But let me take this opportunity and to ask you, because everybody is expecting the counteroffensive in Ukraine, and we all hope that Ukrainians will be able to push out Russians from their territory as much as possible, including Crimea. But how realistic those hopes are, in your opinion, and what happens ultimately if this fails? What does it mean for us, for Europeans? Will there be a fatigue?
Thank you very much. Look, I will not comment, or I would say make a different scenario on what is at stake, because we speak about real life and the future of Ukraine. I think all of us have been very impressed from the very beginning of this war by the ability of the Ukrainians to resist and to deliver such concrete results. And I think we were very much impressed, if I may say, by how the Russians resisted probably much more from the economic point of view than we thought, but how they delivered much less on the military side than we thought at the very beginning. And this is due to this Ukrainian commitment and their ability to be strategic, smart, brave, and perfectly well organized. So I do know that they are preparing very carefully this counteroffensive and the ability to sustain this war effort during months, not just to make a counteroffensive, but to sustain positions. I don't want to commend them because I don't want to weaken or jeopardize their ability to succeed, but I think this is a very important moment. I will not here deploy a sort of what-if scenario, because whatever happens, I do believe that they will deliver. It will not create de facto an acceptance from the Russians to negotiate. What we need in parallel is to make this counteroffensive credible, because first, we have to be very clear as Europeans that our support will stay strong and will last. This is very important. Second, if we provide clear and tangible security guarantees, this is where Vilnius will be very important. And third, if we re-engage what we call now, I'm not sure to be a big fan of this formula, but the Global South, I mean key countries, and at least the G20, to be sure that we involve them in the peace process, and a comprehensive peace process, which is not a ceasefire. So this is, for me, this cumulative efforts we have to provide in the coming months. Perhaps it will not be sufficient and the war will last. I think at that time, we will have to reassess the situation to see how to calibrate our support at that time. But let's be clear. If we decrease our support, if de facto we accept a sort of a ceasefire or a frozen conflict, time will be on the Russian side. Mm-hmm. For sure. We have to be lucid about that. And this is why, given the effort made till now, and given the fact that this war is a matter of principle for the global order as well, and I think for the sustainability of the European security and safety, we should not accept such a scenario, and our reassessment during autumn and winter should be made at the light of what will happen in the coming months, but as well at the light of our strategic scenario, the one I tried to describe.
Thank you. And when there will be, the war will be over one day, and peace will be achieved, do you think Russians can come back to the international stage, and under which conditions?
I think it's too early to answer this question, because even starting to answer this question will make you, I would say, unacceptable. For sure, if and when this is sustainable peace at the Ukrainian conditions and complying with international rules, de facto, Russia will be entitled to come back at the table of our international order, but it will depend on the outcome of such a negotiation.
And also, a just peace means that the war crimes that have been made will be punished, of course, in long term.
De facto, and this is why from day one we cooperated with Ukraine on this issue. And this is one, sustainable peace means as well having justice and trials.
Thank you. Mr. President, so let me open the conversation also to the room, and I've seen a question here on the left side. So Maria Mezantseva here, she's a member of the Ukrainian parliament, so if we have, you have the mic already, okay. So please keep it short, and I'm taking 3 questions at one round.
Thank you, Robert. Pleased to see you again, President. Happy to see you. I'm Maria Mezantseva, member of Ukrainian Parliament, chairwoman of the delegation to the Council of Europe. And I would like to pick up on the issue you've just raised, is the justice. So I'm very pleased that my 14 hours drive from Kiev yesterday to here made it happen. President, how do you see the future for the trials of the top military and political leadership of Russia? As of to say, how do we go ahead to establish the international tribunal for the crime of aggression? Because we have registered domestically more than 87,000 of the war crimes. But the reason for those, all of them was one, is the crime of aggression. How can we proceed? And thank you again for the leadership in the core group for all the resolutions we voted at the parliamentary levels. Merci.
Thank you. I've seen the second question there.
Hello, thank you, Mr. President. My name is Pavel. I work for the CFR. My question would be about the other problematic country, about Belarus, which is part of the aggression, but it is also part of the problem. And in 2020, Belarus elected democracy, and you met Svetlana Tikhanovskaya 3 years ago. But nothing has changed. We still have a illegal government there who invited Russian troops, and it more or less looks like a captured state. And the reaction from the European community is more of the support of the civil society. But do you think that we need something more in order, whether we see what is happening there, do you think we need to have more focus on the country and not only thinking about freedom of media while we have tanks there? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to pass the mic to the middle of the room.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, there we are. Thanks, sorry for that. Benjamin Tallis, German Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. President, it's no secret that France needs to build trust in Central and Eastern Europe, and your words today were good to hear in that regard, but concrete steps are needed too. Strongly backing Ukraine's NATO membership would be such a concrete step. Will you do that here and now?
Okay.
So as for the first question, and I'm very happy to meet you again, and thank you for being here. I think the top priority is to have a full-fledged assistance to be sure that we have all evidence for these war crimes. So this is why we focused ourselves by this cooperation with experts, policemen, judges, and so on. This is the first steps because we have to bring evidence and to build these cases and to prepare justice. Second point, we need a credible international organization to do so. This is all the debates we have on the International Court of Justice, international jurisdiction backed on Ukrainian justice. And we know all these debates, and we had very good exchange with President Zelensky on this issue. And we will, I think, build up something credible and tangible. Third, timing issue. And this is where I want to be very transparent and honest with you. The question is, if in a few months to come, you have a window for a negotiation with the existing Russian political power, the question will be an arbitrage between a trial or a negotiation. I will be very frank with you. And you will have to negotiate with the leaders you have, de facto. Even if the day after you will have to judge them in front of the international justice. But I think your priority is to win this war by building a sustainable peace and to be sure we have as well. So this trials and a fair justice. So this is a question of articulation, because otherwise you can put yourself just in an impossible situation where you say, I want you to go to jail, but you are the only one I can negotiate with. And this situation can exist. I'm not speaking about you.
Thank you,
So
I'm relieved.
This is the point. So I want to be in full support, in concrete terms. I want us to be very strong, to build the capacities, the evidence, international support, but we will have, it depends on how the war will evolve in the coming months. As for Belarus, I agree with you, but this is always the same thing. I think we took very clear decisions in 2020 with sanctions, but de facto, let's be lucid on ourselves, we pushed Belarus towards Russia and the political system. And never forget that Belarus, whatever Lukashenko could be, and it's clear that it was fake elections and it's not a state where rule of law is duly respected and the elections were not respected, and we were right to be tough. But de facto, it was a country where the president and part of this administration wanted to join NATO and was very careful with Russia. We put him in a situation to be trapped in the hands of the Russians. If your question is, do I think we should be more aggressive with Belarus, my answer is no. I think it would be a mistake for us to enlarge the conflict and to take the initiative to enlarge the conflict to Belarus. Second, we have to keep pressuring them to avoid them to join the war. Today, you have Russian deployments in Belarus, but Belarus is not part of this war and not deploying troops and soldiers and capacities in Ukraine and against Ukrainian people. They are in a sort of ambiguity on this issue. And I think we have to deploy, I would say, a multi-pronged approach. First, helping civil societies, as we do. I think it's very important. And pushing more contribution and helping them to have a fair and free and open debate. Second, offering them perspectives if they come back in the club and reorganize elections. We have to make more clear the upside scenario if they decide to reorganize election and have free elections, how we are engaged and what do we offer. And third, made a clear pressure on Lukashenko and the current administration, but by providing exit strategy as well. When you just sanction and never provide exit strategy, you put just people to remain as they are. And this is much more a security and a separate debate. As for membership to NATO, I think this debate we will have it in Vilnius. And this is exactly what we will discuss with Chancellor Scholz next week and some of our players. I think we have to build something between the security provided to Israel and a full-fledged membership. I'm not sure we will have a consensus for a Vilnius summit for a full-fledged membership, let's be clear. But as you understood, and I think very clear, I think we need strong and concrete and tangible security guarantees. So no way for having a sort of Budapest package, doesn't make sense. I mean, we know it's not bulletproof. I think it's not sufficient to have a sort of Israel-type package. We need something much more substantial, and we need a path towards at least this membership. So something concrete, substantial, for the two reasons I mentioned. De facto, Ukraine is protecting us, and de facto, Ukraine is so well equipped that we have to re-anchor them in sort of security framework.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I see two questions here on the Slido. Some of you are asking, and they both have 88 likes, so I will ask them. Mr. President, do you still consider NATO a brain dead? And the second question, Mr. President, do you still, Mr. President, where is it? It's moving. If you look at Europe in 2050, so in long term, how dependent it will be on China when it comes to Green Deal, and how fragmented Europe will be in defense industry or armies?
Look, as for the first question, I answered it in my speech. I think NATO was clearly had a wake-up call by Russia. And I would say this is a native question. It's part of the DNA. So the reaction was prompt, efficient, and well-tailored because it's this is a very well-known scenario. So I think NATO is very useful, and it was a strategic clarification. Now, let me complete that. Are we completely consistent, and do I think that the inconsistency I raised a few years ago are solved and fixed with the current context? No. NATO needs a European pillar, which is an indispensable complement, I mentioned it. NATO needs stronger Europe to protect itself, but being part as well of the security treaty. We have to clarify with some of our members because some members of NATO still don't implement sanctions to Ukraine and sometimes help to alleviate the burden for the Russians. I'm not sure it's perfectly consistent with the NATO approach. And I think we will have in front of us some clarification. I think NATO is for North Atlantic, not for Southeast Asia. So my point is, if progressively or de facto we push NATO to enlarge the spectrum and the geography, we will make a big mistake. And I've always been very clear on that. This is part of the assessment I made. So my point is, clearly, we had the wake-up call. Clearly, NATO is very useful for interoperability and this kind of stuff, but it's not sufficient. We have still embedded risk, and it should not put us in a situation not to think about our future for ourselves. As a pillar of NATO, as European defense, but to invent ourselves our security architecture, which should not be reduced to NATO. As for our relationship with China, regarding Green Deal and defense industry, I think so we have two issues. I think there is a big risk to be very dependent on Green Deal from China, but as well from the US. This is a consequence of a naive European Union during decades and a late wake-up call without sufficient delivery during the past 2 years, where the US decided to rush, for good reasons, by the way. I explain myself. We deployed like crazy solar panels in Europe during the 90s and beginning of this centuries, and we managed to deploy Chinese solar panels, sorry. I think if we want to succeed in our Green Deal, we need two additional things. We are the best in class in terms of regulation. Europe has clear targets. We created a Green Deal. We are one of the most regulated space regarding green industry and carbon emission of this world. But we invest less than China and the US, and we have less incentives. And we don't develop a sufficient industrial footprint compliant with this agenda. So more investment, more green industry. Here are the two pillars. This is exactly what I said in reaction to the IRA from the US. And I think we took the right decision during the past few months by taking a new framework, by precisely giving some flexibility on state aid and having a sort of European IRA. Is it sufficient? I'm not sure. Let's be lucid and let's assess what's happening and what will happen in the coming months. If you have a lot of big projects being allocated in the US and not in Europe, this is a problem for us. So we have to bridge the gap. We need this matching clause. And we have to be very careful because we have to bridge the gap with the US, but we have to avoid having just 2 or 3 big countries which could afford with bridging the gap, and some others being the collateral victims of this reallocation. So we need an investment strategy, an industrial strategy, if we don't want to be dependent on China in 2050 for our Green Deal. We set the standard, this is fair. Now we need to deliver and implement this regulation, no additional regulation, but till the end of this regulation and our agenda, to be clear, and more investment and more industrial strategy. For our defense industry and armies, I mean, this is in our hands. I tried to precisely describe what I do believe it's our interest. We need to simplify and harmonize our standards in terms of defense industry. We need to invest more, and we need a bi-European approach for our defense. This is a matter of independence. And this is why, and in parallel, indeed, we need more integration and more intimacy between our armies. We have, I think, a clear advantage because we have interoperability provided by NATO. On top of that, we need common operations and common initiatives between Europeans. So I think it totally depends on us. I do believe that we can have much more integration in this regard.
Thank you very much. We still have few minutes left, so I'm looking in the room for the questions. I see on this side, first question and the second would come to the middle of the room.
Kim Dozier with Military Times and CNN. Sir, you mentioned during your speech that you don't want European security reliant on U.S. voters. Is France prepared to step up in terms of leadership and funding if the next U.S. president backs off in terms of leading the effort to help Ukraine and to fund Ukraine's war to survive Russia? Thank you.
Thank you. And the second question in the middle.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrej Žeravský. I'm BOD member of the nuclear company VUE. President Sir, it's possible to understand your speech we were listening several minutes ago as an ambition of France to reconquest the position of power and the responsible of power in a manner or in scale as it was between wars, meaning the 20s and 30s?
Interesting question.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Interesting question, and let's give one more last question to the audience. In this side, at the back.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour votre intervention. My question, I'm Yunus, I'm from Global Diplomatic Forum in London. My question is, France is a big contributor to the EU, but on other side is a big contributor to damaging EU reputation in parts of the world like Africa and Middle East and with Turkey as well. How do you think you're working on that to rectify this image, given that you mentioned that there is a not alliance with this global south? Thank you.
Thank you.
Look, let's be clear. As for the US administration, as I mentioned, we are very lucky to have to have the Biden administration. First, because President Biden does understand and does love Europe. And it's been very clear from day one. And it delivered a very, I think, reliable, concrete, and consistent agenda with us. I don't want to speculate on the results and the outcomes of the US election because it's probably, I don't exclude that the Russians are doing so. But as for France and as a European, I do hope we will have continuity in this approach. But whatever happens, because my point is not to make a what-if scenario, whatever happens, we have to increase our commitments, our investments, and our involvement. And de facto, the law we are passing in France for our defense is an increase of 100 billion euro of our war and defense effort. So yes, my answer, yes, we are ready. But my hope is that we will do it on top of the confirmation of a US commitment and a confirmation of the current US strategy. As for your question, I mean, it's very hard to say because the continent is not in the same situation and it's no more a continent of empires. This is a big difference. With the Slavic approach at that time of well-known French foreign affairs ministers. But I do believe, yes, I would like France to be seen, perceived, and lived as a friendly, credible, and long-term ally and partner by all countries of this region for their security, for their energy as well, what we are developing in nuclear energy, in hydrogen, and so on is absolutely critical, in connections and in culture. And I think we have to build this new relationship and this new, not just place of friends, but partnerships and equal partnerships as well with this region in this new era without any empire. And I think I've always been very much impressed by how much populists in this region precisely use the perception of the EU, sometimes Brussels, and sometimes the condominium on France and Germany as a resurgence of past empires. And I think when I offer this partnership and I want to share vision and we build sincere partnerships with countries of the region, this is not to recreate this type of link, but a fair and equal approach. Because I don't neglect the fact that during the whole century, bold people in these countries fought against big empires. They don't want to be in this situation, to be submitted to a decision taken in Brussels or in other capitals. And this is my view of the European Union. And I think this is very important for all of us. If we want the European Union to be credible, and this is the message of France, we have to enlarge it, we have to make it a strong power, but we have to make it collectively, I speak for ourselves, less lecturing other people and more working with them for common interest. So this is a strategy, so not a replica of what we made 90 years ago, but a new approach. As for what you said, and the perception in Africa, and sometimes Middle East, even if I would distinguish Middle East from Africa, and if I were very careful with that, it's clear that France is very much attacked on social networks and in part of African societies because of a new narrative saying that we are a colonial state and playing with our past. Sometimes this narrative was used by other big players of this region, but it's clearly a narrative pushed by Russia. And I speak from a country, in a country where Russian narrative, manipulation of information, disinformation on social networks is very well known. So let's not be naive collectively to buy at face value the power of this narrative. I think we made a big mistake. We made several mistakes in Africa. Number one, we consider that we can provide security guarantees without a full-fledged political commitment of the governments and the countries themselves. This is what happened in Mali. And this is why I completely reassess this position and I redefine our strategy as a partnership approach, taking security as part of the other pillars with civil societies and so on, but a much more equal partnership. But the European and especially the French are not in a situation to be a substitute to a government to provide security in place of them, but to fight against terrorism at the request of the government and in close partnership with civil societies and so on. Second, we were definitely too naive and we let the information space to some spoilers and especially the Russians. And they conveyed with a lot of efficiency anti-European and especially anti-French narrative. Does it mean that it's true? No. Those who are in a sort of colonial approach in this country are those who are providing unsustainable debt, taking assets in exchange of this debt, or sending mercenaries to take control of some mining activities or providing security to some people in order to replace legitimate governments. Here are the spoilers of Africa, not the Europeans. And we defined a new approach and a new ambition during the European Union, African Union Summit beginning of 2022. Now we have to deliver, and this is efficiency of our approach. Partnership and respect in Africa and Middle East of this approach is absolutely key, but we have to be much more, let's say, aggressive on the information space in order to fight against this, let's be clear, Russian narrative. It will allow me to make an additional remark to my speech and my answers. Indeed, and we had the opportunity to discuss with some intellectuals before, I spoke about the war, I spoke about the front line we all of us see. But in all our countries, we are invisible front lines on which the Russians will play, which is the support to this war, the support to Ukraine, and how playing with some movements and political movements, pushing fake information, pushing this type of narrative, Russia, with some proxies, is using informational space to play on war fatigue and to weaken our support. This war is absolutely critical, especially in democracies, because democracy have a sort of native weakness in comparison with authoritarian regime. They have public opinions, and it matters because people go to vote. And especially when you have big manipulations in this period of time, and I speak in front of some candidates for the upcoming election in this country, it's absolutely vital to be sure that we have a fair, loyal space of information, because how to frame public opinion is as important as how people will vote tomorrow. And we did care about education, we did care about rule of law, we did care about independence of justice, journalism, and conditions of free election, which is very important, and we have to protect all these pillars. But we should not forget the way public opinion is forged in our current democracy. It's through these social networks. And these social networks, these platforms are used today by Russia much more efficiently than what we do. This is why we have to increase and strengthen as well our, let's call it, democratic war effort as well. This is an absolute complement of the strategy I tried to describe.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm extremely happy that you exactly finished on the point of the information war that is going inside of our societies. We need to win at home in order to be able to win in Ukraine, and we have to win on all front lines. So you brought a unique blend of style and substance to the stage, Mr. President. So that is going, your leadership and commitment in promoting global stability and resilience is very important, and we as Central Europeans are with you. So we take this as an invitation to work more together in the future, and let me extend my invitation to you to come back to the GLOBSEC Forum next year. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Mr. President.